Hello, everyone. This is Bob Terzotis, and we will be starting the broadcast in a couple of minutes. We have people still joining, so we want to give them an opportunity to get logged in. All right. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar. I'm Bob Terzotis, EVP at Mather Economics, and we're excited about today's webinar titled, What is Your Digital ROI? Start the recording now. A few housekeeping items. Your active participation is important for this webinar. So during the presentation, we'll be managing the chat functionality. So please feel free to enter your questions in the question box throughout the presentation, and we'll do our best to read them aloud and get you the answers. And also, a copy of the slides and a recording of today's event will be emailed to all of you who registered for the session. We have a great session today that attempts to answer questions that some of you have already had to answer, some will have to answer soon, some may be asking the same questions over again, and that is, what is my digital ROI? We have a great panel for you today. Next slide, Shelley. Our moderator from the home of the world champion Philadelphia Eagles is Jim Gorman, Director of Sales and Audience at Philadelphia Media Network. And our presenters, Arvid Chiefchel, the Head of Digital Analytics and Data Science at Mather Economics, and Todd Hodgson, Director of Product Management at Outside Magazine. It should be a very good discussion how publications are approaching this subject. So I'll turn it over to Jim to get things started.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. First, we'll lead off with some of the things that brought the decision to a head in Philly. We obviously had digital ad revenue was declining, as well as print subs were on the decline. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Shelley. We wanted to balance digital subscription revenue with ad revenue, and the value proposition and content production was important, paramount, I would say, in Philly. We reorganized our newsroom last year, and through a series of voluntary reductions and rehires, we brought in a group of folks that are more digital savvy in some areas of the business, and we knew that we wanted to go more in line with what our digital audience is, and make the transition from print to print plus digital and or the digital platforms. Philly.com launched in 1998. And was launched as a free website like many of our peers, and will remain free until September of 2017. Through some well-publicized ownership changes over the course of the last 10 years, there was some digital monetization strategies that were attempted, one of which back in 2011 was to create 2 paid sites in addition to the free Philly.com site, and that was an Inquirer.com site and a DailyNews.com site, which were hard paywalls, and they were centered around each of our separate print products. The Inquirer being a broadsheet, where that accounts for most of the home delivered circulation in the Philly market, and the Daily News being a tab that is mainly a single copy product. And to try and create digital products that were centered around print products was not successful, and was a short experiment. And then Philly.com again went to the forefront of our digital strategy until we decided in late 2015 and early 2016 that we needed to start monetizing and charging for the content that we were serving to our online readership. We had 3 separate newsrooms in the fall of 15. They were competing against one another, and the decision was made, in addition to combining the newsrooms to serve all of our products and platforms, to consolidate them in a way that, the journalism was focused and platform agnostic, regardless of where readers were going to retrieve it, as opposed to a different kind of experience depending on what product you were reading. So next slide, please. So essentially, we decided to launch. We did some analysis and selected a meter technology and platform from among a number of different vendors across the industry, and started to focus our pricing and metric strategies to prepare for a launch. And I think we're on to the next slide here. And this is where I'll let Todd take over and talk about his experience.
Thanks, Jim. So just a little bit of background for those who don't know. Outside is a consumer monthly lifestyle magazine that focuses on inspiring participation in the world outside. So we focus on coverage of outdoor gear, fitness, adventure, travel, and we have about 700,000 print subscribers, and we've been published since 1977. We just celebrated our 40th anniversary. So our print subscriptions have been holding at around 700,000 for some time. We've also been very fortunate on the digital side. Both our traffic and our revenue digitally have been growing since at least I started in 2012. But print magazine sales are definitely getting challenging, and we're always looking for ways to create more traffic and revenue streams at outside. So we can go to the next slide. So while my job as a product person is to be the voice of the user and to do what's best for the user, to research our users, management and stakeholders and people around the company are often very adept at keeping an eye on what competitors are doing. So occasionally the tech press, Recode, Neiman Lab, Digiday, and these other journalism sites will report on a success story from a site that might be doing well with their paywall. And as these come out, there's this fear of missing out internally. Paywall question mark inevitably comes up on meeting agendas, and this was recurring every 2 to 3 months. And the question of whether we should consider a paywall is a very valid one, and it's one that makes sense to investigate. But what can be a challenge and frustrating, and what I think you have to watch out for, is that a lot of these meetings, at least in my experience, kind of devolve to people just listing out the different permutations of how a paywall would look for the end user. So if we can go to the next slide, we can see like one person will say, well, we could offer 5 free articles a month and charge $50 a year. And then someone else will say, well, wait a minute, actually $50 sounds too high. I think we should charge $24 a month, and the user only gets 3 page views per month so that more people will hit the paywall. But we need another caveat. We can't include video because we need all the video views we can get. And then someone from circulation will jump in and say, well, what about all the print subscribers? If my subscribers are already paying $24 for the print magazine, why should they have to pay more? Digital should be included. So dreaming up these permutations of price and the meter limit, what that might look like is very easy to do, and it's just not that productive, at least from the outset. What's not easy is going through the data and seeing what your data tells you and what your users are likely to do, and then analyzing the risk from that. So I and a few of my coworkers decided to do that. We have Google Analytics at outside, the free version, and we waded through the data, and eventually we discovered that getting to the number of users who will encounter some kind of a meter, some type of a metered paywall, whatever that you decide that will be, that's really only the tip of the iceberg. You then have to determine how many of those people will actually pay money to subscribe. And then the other side of that is whoever doesn't pay, which is going to be a big number, that's going to be ad impressions that they would have seen that we're now missing out on. So this potential risk has to be factored in. So the stakes are just very high with a paywall. It's fundamentally changing the way your most engaged users are going to experience your content. It's not testing a risque article or putting up a new, changing the font of your headlines. This is really something you only get one shot at. So I convinced management that because the stakes are so high, we need someone with both the experience and the technology to focus on every aspect of it. What are the patterns of our users? What is the recommended subscription cost? What's the page views threshold? What type of attrition rate can we expect? And then someone to own the analytics and the risk. Mather was a good choice for us because they offered all of this, and they did it in the correct order, which is what I like. They didn't come to us talking about dollar amounts and meter threshold. They wanted to start with the user. They wanted to start in the right place. What are your users actually doing? Let's collect the data. Let's see what patterns emerge. from that. So I'm going to hand it over to Arvid to talk about exactly how they did that for us.
Yeah, that sounds good. So yeah, in terms of what Todd laid out, really is kind of this. I won't go through all of these bullet points here. And again, as Bob said, we'll send out the PowerPoint after the session. But essentially, it's kind of the pre-decision questions that everyone has. And really, our approach is to try to answer as many of these questions as possible to enable a really strong, kind of data set or a key, points of information so that the executive team and all stakeholders can make the right decision. So that's really what we did, is to kind of consolidate those kinds of questions that Jim and Todd talked about into a set of analysis that kind of says, let's look at the data, let's do a full deep dive into the kind of trade-offs of a paywall, the propensity of the users to pay, what are the risks involved, and then deliver a very clear and cohesive document that outlines, here are your various options, here's where we think the most likely scenario is, here's some other scenarios to think about, and then they can go back to their boardrooms and kind of decide how to move forward. So the next few slides, I'll basically briefly go over Outside Magazine's case study and kind of share some, and Todd's been kind enough to give us the permission to share some key data points, including revenue numbers, not all of them, but some of the ones that are relevant for the analysis. So the approach is really two or threefold. One is to, we install our listener data platform tracking tool on the site. It's very similar to Google, and I'll give a quick overview of what that is as well. We then analyze the propensity of the audience to pay for content, looking at, what are the engagement, profiles of the users? Are they looking like they're potentially subscribers? And at the same time, looking at the risks. So if you do implement a paywall, are you risking ad revenue, and if so, how much? After that, we prepare a break-even analysis. So looking at, if you were to launch a paywall today and you were to essentially mitigate risk 100%, how many new subscribers do you need to hit that break-even point? And then through that, we can pretty easily say how far or how big is that gap between reality and kind of what that break-even point is. From there, we go into preparing several case studies or scenarios where we actually say, here's the top 3 or top 6 things we think will happen in the first 12 months under these assumptions. And that's usually a collaborative process where we might propose our most likely, and then Todd or the team might ask us to prepare some other scenarios that might exist. And then finally, delivery of the final document. So I'll spend maybe 20 seconds on Listener. So high level, Listener is essentially a tracking tool, very similar to Google Analytics or Omniture in terms of what it captures. Very different in terms of how granular and detailed the data is, and how we integrate with different platforms. So not only do we capture kind of the page view and the user data, we're also capturing data from any kind of registrations or commenting engines, from the ad servers and ad revenue directly, as well as any offline data like newsletter clicks or registrations if it exists. I won't go through the whole diagram here, but effectively that gives us a really strong data set to do all the kind of data processing and predictive modeling that I just described in the prior document. Lastly, we are able to actually implement the recommendations. So if Todd were to choose to or any publisher were to choose to move forward with a paywall, we could actually implement the recommendations through the Listener back into the paywall as well. So I'll briefly go over some of the approach or some of the methodology here. So the first thing we looked at was Outside Magazine segmentation or their engagement profile. So we approach engagement looking at 3 primary indicators. One is just simply volume. So looking at, on a per user basis, how many pages does a person read over a given month or a 3-day period? How many articles did they read? We also look at frequency or recency. So over that 30-day snapshot, how often do they visit the site? Is it once a month? Is it twice a month, twice a week, every day? And then lastly, we look at just site usage in general. So that's looking at what we call content breadth. What that is essentially how many distinct areas of content does a user read. So as an example, if I were to read, outdoor gear content, sports content, and travel content, that would be 3 distinct areas. Even if I exceeded my, had a very high page view count in one or the other, I'm still counting 3 distinct sections of content. We also look at scroll depth. So that's literally how far down the page a user scrolls. So if they load the site, they're effectively above the fold. And if they start scrolling and reading the article, we can measure how deep did they go, 50% of the page, 80%, 100%. And lastly, time on site, which is pretty much the same as most other tracking tools. So the mix of those key engagement metrics gets translated into essentially 6 engagement groups, where we see, from the top to bottom, in terms of engagement, the most is the fanatics, kind of the most engaged group. We see then kind of the enthusiasts and stable users as well. These are the top 3 engagement groups. And collectively, they form about, in this case, it's about, looking at the numbers, about 14% of audience. But collectively, they account for nearly, or actually more than half of audience page views. So again, it's a very small engaged group, but again, they're accounting for a large share of page views because they're so engaged. And those 3 groups effectively are what we call active users. The flip side of that is you have a significant user base of what we call flybys or dabblers. I won't spend too much time describing them, but they're effectively kind of one and done users. And they're probably 80% or so of any given site. In Outside Magazine's case, about 85%. And they may also generate half or less than half of total page views. So that's kind of our first foray. I took a few quick snapshots of their specific segments. So looking at the key engagement metrics that we talked about, like frequency and page views, you can see that top, 4% of audience, the fanatics, they're generating, on average, reading about 22 articles a month. They're visiting the site 8.5 days over the course of a month, so almost every week, almost, and even sometimes more than once per day. Visiting 8 minutes for every visit. And scrolling pretty far down the page to 60%. What's also unique that based on how Listener captures the data, we can tell the ad revenue from those users. So when we look at risk and reward, we can say, okay, the fanatics, it's likely that some proportion of that fanatic group will pay for content. However, the trade-off is basically $6.05 in terms of ad revenue that you have to kind of consider. So that's sort of the math we're doing behind the scenes, is saying, how many of those fanatics do we think will actually pay for content, or enthusiasts or stable users? And then what is that risk involved in terms of ad revenue? So that was kind of one analysis we did. The second was looking at more kind of behavior analysis. So looking at where are people coming from, what are they reading, what devices they're using. And here we're just summarizing, again, by the top 3, or by all the 6 engagement buckets, from flybys to fanatics, what content are they reading? In Outside Magazine's case, you can see that the fanatics really preferred and focused on outdoor gear content. And that was their most preferred section. Whereas, the flybys, they seem kind of mixed, where 80% of the flybys are kind of reading, a mix of 3 different areas. In the fanatics case, half or more are essentially reading that outdoor gear. So what this does is kind of gives us a sense of, if we were to identify, what is the value proposition to an audience, or what content do we think is ready to be monetized, or the question of, am I producing enough content, or is there enough there to actually make people pay for it? This is kind of the key kind of data points that we look at, where we say, all right, is there enough engagement in certain content that we say is valuable? And if not, are there ways that we can recommend that the newsroom kind of promote more content, or create kind of the relevant content that is actually going to be valuable for users? And then one more slide here I'll share on the behavior that was kind of pretty unique, actually. And Todd, feel free to interject here. But I think in almost every case, when we do this kind of analysis, Facebook is sort of the worst performer in terms of attracting fanatics. So in this case, what we saw was Facebook was a pretty high share in terms of the top referrer, a pretty high share of that fanatics category or engagement group. So it's almost counterintuitive to where, when we're looking for buying signals, we typically see that Facebook is not a very strong driver of conversions or propensity to pay. But in this case, it was a very kind of mixed bag, where even though Facebook is typically a bad driver of conversions, the audience that was on the site, on Outside Magazine's site, was actually very engaged and came from Facebook. So this may speak to, and Todd, feel free to add any comments, any of kind of the work you're doing around Facebook groups, or some of the other work you're doing on Facebook.
Yeah, we do put a lot of emphasis on our social platforms, Facebook in particular. We have a few groups that show very active engagement. I think a big part of that is we've never bought any likes on any of our social platforms. So the people our people who are coming to our Facebook page.
Right. I think you shared with me that you mentioned when you look at the kind of the stats, you index as one of the highest engaged sort of Facebook groups. Or
yes,
Facebook
exactly. Facebook allows you to look at how you compare with other publishers, and we're consistently the highest among our competitors.
So yeah, I was kind of jokingly kidding with Todd, maybe he should do a webinar on just how to use Facebook for the news media industry because he's been so successful at doing that. Anyway, so there's a taste of the analysis. Again, there's plenty more charts that we usually provide, but just a taste of kind of what we do. From there, we get into the revenue analysis, and this is where I described sort of the break-even, the trade-offs, and those kind of things. So the first thing we did was look at, okay, if we do let's say we approach the strategy as a metered paywall, meaning that some users will be given some amount of free articles to read over some period of time, and then once they reach 5 or 6 or 10 or however many articles, they'll be asked to pay. So based on the data we saw from Listener, we actually estimated the absolute risk of any paywall to be about 9% of ad revenue in their case. The reason for that is if you look at kind of a snapshot of their monthly ad revenue, the majority is coming from sponsorship sales. So this is again another, I think success that Outside has had, where they've been able to really have a really strong relationship with advertisers and be able to sell these kind of sponsorship ads as opposed to looking for programmatic. And as I understand, I think programmatic is not even on your site, as I understand, Todd. Yeah. Right. So that was kind of the first look at just what does that total risk look like for metered paywall. From there, we broke down that risk by different sort of breakouts. So one we looked at was content. So, I mentioned outdoor gear as being a driver of the fanatics. And not surprisingly, it's actually one of the bigger risk categories in terms of metering or kind of walling that content off. So again, any decision that would be made in terms of paywall would have to be kind of considering, again, that fanatics conversion propensity, but also the risk you're putting on both the content they're reading and the users you're kind of impacting with the paywall. We also looked at the impact by meter settings. So the chart here shows the risk at each kind of point of how many articles do you if you set your meter at, let's say, 1 article, you're going to risk about 100,000 ad revenue. But if you set the meter at 30 articles, you're risking only 3,000 a month in ad revenue. So again, in terms of mitigating some of the risk, a metered paywall was recommended as opposed to a premium wall, just because you could kind of, again, control how aggressive you were with that paywall and control how much revenue you'd be able to put up at risk at any point in time. And similarly, this was a specific request by Todd and team, was to look at the risk not just by meter count by page views, but also by unique days. So they had an interesting, scenario that they want us to model, where the meter count was based on just the visit days. And here again, we found a similar sort of decline right around the 7th day. So if you let someone read for 7 days out of the month, you're not risking too much ad revenue. So I'll just speed through some of these tables. I know this is kind of an eye chart, so I apologize for putting this in a PowerPoint. But so that was kind of the risk profile. So from there, we backed into, okay, assuming that risk profile under different meter settings, what is the break-even conversion revenue or consumer revenue that Outside we need to get to essentially not risk anything or kind of, again, break even. So in this example, I've highlighted the 10th kind of a meter of 10 free articles over 30 days. You can see that it's going to impact effectively about 860,000 pages on a monthly basis. You're going to put that at risk. You're going to essentially risk $21,000 in ad revenue under that scenario. And you're going to impact about 88,000 people who are actually going to encounter the paywall at that level, meter of 10. The next few tables there show the number of conversions that Outside would have needed to have converted on a monthly basis to, again, essentially mitigate that $21,000 in ad risk. So again, at a price point of, let's say, $2, which is highlighted there, they would have to convert effectively about 1,800 new subscribers every month out of that 8,800. And the conversion rate effectively would be about 2.1%. So that was kind of just, again, the break even under those scenarios or those assumptions. And based on all of our benchmark data and propensity to pay data from Outside, we couldn't really get to a profitable point where that 2.1 conversion rate is very, very high compared to what we see in the industry. It's usually 1% or less under those scenarios. And the other point that we saw for outside was the magazine industry has a very different business model where a newspaper may price their product at $15, $20 a month. Outside, I think to be kind of in line with the competition, at the most could go as high as $5 a month. And to be in kind of a direct competition with one of their main competitors, to kind of price that competitively, $2 is probably about where they want to max out or in that range. So there's kind of 2 or 3 mitigating or kind of confounding factors where your ad revenue in outside's magazine case was relatively high. The consumer revenue was not going to be that high given the price points, and the propensity to pay that we estimated was not quite as strong to really warrant a higher scenario forecast. So again, I won't spend too much time on this page, but we put together a few scenarios, and again, the top one there is looking at kind of the most likely scenario, meter of 15, under various assumptions. What does that look like? So effectively, in the first year, we estimated that under normal conditions, they'd actually lose about $30,000 in net revenue over that first 12 months. That third row, we did see there was a case where we could perhaps see a profitable scenario, but it was using a very optimistic conversion rate to kind of eat away at that ad risk, and we just didn't feel comfortable recommending to Todd and team to move forward with those assumptions. And I'll probably skip this one. This is just a quick survey we put together just on their competitors, just the magazine industry as well. So like I said, the conclusions, again, for outside is the first year would not really be profitable in terms of net revenue, looking at that balance of risking the ad revenue and what the trade-off would be on the consumer revenue. And like I mentioned before, the relatively high, successful ad strategy that they're taking, and then the low consumer prices effectively that they would have to implement, and the current propensity modeling that we've done, it didn't look like it was really going to be a good fit. That said, we did still recommend, to do some things to test and learn, just to kind of, see what the audience would do. So sometimes, we are conservative. So, if we said 2.1 was too high from a, conversion rate was too high, testing would prove if we were right or wrong about that. But essentially, I think we recommended a registration wall, some A/B testing, and also just to kind of take a look at the content and, is there enough there in terms of a value proposition? And that's, again, kind of a qualitative discussion as well as a data-driven conversation. So that was essentially a couple of months of work in about 15 minutes. Besides the actual data work, we do have, as you might know, experience with a lot of different publishers and a lot of great data. So we can always, besides just that sort of data-driven discussion, it's a lot of sort of, industry knowledge and recommendations based on best practices. So that was basically the analysis, and we handed it over to Todd, and I'll let perhaps Todd or Jim go on here with kind of the decision process.
Yeah, next slide there, please, Shelley. It boils down to making the decision. There are a number of factors that we took a look at. I mentioned earlier selecting a meter technology and vendor partner. We vetted 5 different solutions and ultimately decided to go with MG2, who we had already integrated into our Circ system through their solicitor kiosk interfaces and our online customer service portal. So they were kind of a natural fit ultimately there for us. And then we were already working with Mather on the MVP side for our print subscriber pricing performance. So, they were a natural with this product the listener provided and integrating into MG2 and ultimately being able to use the same sort of data to serve a customized segmented audience message that resonates with them based on their content consumption and frequency of visits. We also had to determine pricing and the metrics that made sense. I spoke with many in the industry, some probably on this call, about what metrics they were paying close attention to and which ones would be most helpful in modeling what the volumes and the revenue would be like from a digital revenue solution. And ultimately, would readers pay enough to offset the ad revenue decline? Our CPMs, especially with programmatic, were not, as robust as what Todd describes there. So it was a pure revenue play, and we actually expected traffic to drop at as much as 30% with the launch of the meter and the reorganization of our newsroom, and then bounce back. Of course, we did plan for the Eagles Super Bowl win, so that was helpful. That they came through on that end for us. So not serious, but it certainly did help us about halfway through our first year in launch. So we found partners that had technology solutions that we could work together with. We were already confident in the work that we were receiving from Mather on the print side, and translating that to using the same sorts of data and segmentation to be more effective on conversion rate was high on our list, and one of the reasons that we selected the vendors that we did. But ultimately, we found out that at some point you just got to say go. Every stakeholder is on edge. CERC wants to go because it's a revenue opportunity. Although we priced up our print subscribers to receive digital service along with their print product. Advertising was worried about the traffic drop, and the newsroom was worried about the audience performance and how that would be impacted from both the meter and the new newsroom, newly combined newsroom and strategy on content. So ultimately, you can become paralyzed through analysis, and ultimately, we just had to go, and we launched September 5th. We had a tremendous success out of the gate. We started with 0. We did have about 4,500 legacy replica subscribers that we count as digital moving forward, but from September 5th through yesterday, we're over 21,500 digital subscribers, and they're all paying a rate that's comparable to what a print subscriber would be paying if they were about at the same point in their journey. So the decision is important, but don't belabor all of the factors that enter into that, or you can find yourself, spending more time talking than doing. Todd, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so our decision-making process, even though some of the numbers that Arvid shared might not sound like a lot of advertising revenue at risk for some other publishers, it was too much for us at first, for now. And that would be exacerbated by the types of modifications we'd have to make to the paywall on the back end. So as Arvid said earlier, Outside doesn't do any programmatic ads. So all the ads on our site are direct sold. And if we're not sold out, users will see house ads for the print magazine or Outside Go or other internal programs. So cutting off users from ads, that was causing way too much anxiety for our sales team. And I started to envision scenarios where a certain advertiser might be trending to just barely deliver or maybe under deliver, and we'd have a request to turn off paywall for everything in the Volvo campaign. So that's adding, it might sound easy from a salesperson's perspective, but that adds a lot of complexity to how this is built. And then there's the building of the paywall, the development of it in general. You can't underestimate the development portion of it. There's not, in the back end of our CMS, there's not a little tick box that says, implement paywall, yes, no. It's not that easy. There's implementing a paywall for a website our size is a sizable development lift. Site performance is very important to us. We've worked very hard over the past couple of years to make our site very fast. We'd have to upgrade how we handle the cache on our site so that users who are logged in get just as fast of an experience as users who aren't logged in. There's the question of how do we actually accept the money? Do we enlist the services of a third party? How does our CMS talk to that CMS? There's the whole user experience around this. What happens if a user wants to change their password? What happens if they need to change their credit card? And then how do we tie our print subscriptions to the paywall? If somebody's already paying $24 a year for our print product, they might not take kindly to paying again on the website, so we have to get our system to talk to that one. There's the QA around everything. We need to make sure this works on every device and every browser. We don't want a situation where on a particular Samsung phone, people are getting a paywall meter right away, and I could see that happening. And then there's the maintenance of everything. This isn't like a set it and forget it type deal. I should have said earlier, we have a very small staff at Outside. I have 2 staff developers. So something like this can overwhelm a small development team very easily. This is a big project. So none of those things I just listed out are insurmountable. Like we know how to create a user experience so people can change passwords. But they're all very boring things, and it's things people don't think about until they're problems. They're thinking about the money we can get, the revenue we can get from getting people to sign up. So ultimately, we decided that it wasn't a risk we were willing to take at this time, but we're considering assessing it later.
Well, that's certainly, something that we did not, where we considered developing in-house, but, an out-of-the-box solution with a vendor that we were already working with seemed like a good first step for us to get launched, going back to that go or no-go and analysis paralysis. So I believe that, we should probably move into Q&A. We have a couple of questions that have been submitted. The first, probably Arvid, is a question from Tom Bell asking about what about the reset of cookies or using different browsers and how a listener handles those situations.
Sure. So listener does detect private browsing, so we could create, we can kind of trigger any kind of customized paywall experience or account for that as part of the analysis, figure those out. Unfortunately, it's tough without, a fingerprinting technology to really assess, if someone's using different browsers and different devices, how do you tie that back to the same user without any kind of login ID or without a newsletter, click through. So if they're truly anonymous, they're going to remain anonymous. And that's part of, the behavior of some of those users. We can usually kind of filter that out in the propensity modeling. So it's a technology question as opposed to an analysis question, I guess. But it does apply to the analysis to an extent where we can account for that as part of the risk or reward and kind of measure that.
Okay, and Aaron Beecher has a question for me on the structure of our paywall management team, how it's housed, whether it's in circulation, marketing, or elsewhere, and the day-to-day management of that and how the stakeholders interact. That's quite a load on those questions, but essentially it is a collaboration with our product and IT team. We work with a product manager that is and a creative team that help us with creative changes that we made and the initial design. MG2 is our vendor partner. We work closely with them. I have a subscription marketing manager on my team, and she works kind of as a quarterback with product IT, with MG2, with the newsroom, audience development team, and others to essentially market the subscriptions, send emails out, do analysis and reporting on the data, and share that with the rest of the team. So it's a collaboration. all, essentially all parts of the business, even finance is involved, if you can imagine that. And it's quarterbacked out of the circulation department with that subscription marketing manager team. I have a question or two, if you wouldn't mind, on how do you measure the advertising? I mean, is it something that is in layman's terms, you can put it in a way that's easy for us to understand?
Sure. Yeah, the way that works is so Listener has a direct integration with DFP and several other programmatic networks. So what that means is, let's say if Jim or Todd go to Philly.com and they load the page, assuming they don't have an ad blocker on, there's usually the banner ad, the kind of the 720 by 90 would load at the top, the side ad, and maybe a few other ads below the fold. So what we see in Listeners is essentially a load event or a delivery event of each impression with the line item ID, the creative ID, the advertiser ID, all the above. So we're able to essentially measure directly, specifically for Jim, let's say, on that page, how much ad revenue did he get based on those line items and CPMs attached to the line item. So when we roll it up to a thematic segment or a section, we're rolling up from a very granular level. So that's essentially how that works.
Bob, do we have time for a few more questions? Or I want to be respectful of everyone's time.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of good questions out there. Let's keep going, unless Shelley thinks we should end it.
Keep going.
I'll take that as a yes. Go ahead, Jim.
Okay. Todd, I know you decided not to do it for the time being, but how do you think you might reassess that over the course of the next 2 to 5 years? Is there a metric or a magic number on the ROI that you guys might reconsider the decision, or if programmatic ads become a larger part of your mix? Any thoughts on that?
That could influence it. We don't have a metric per se, but we're taking what we, so even though we decided against a paywall for outside at this time, we're going to use the Mather findings to look into whether a membership model makes sense on outside. So to appeal to the fanatics and enthusiasts and turn some of these dabblers and flybys into more engaged users by going deeper. So I've been talking there's a great website called the Membership Puzzle. I think it's membershippuzzle.org. And they have a ton of research, great articles about membership models. And they also have an awesome database of websites that have memberships rather than just straight up paywalls. And the lines get a little blurry, but the idea is to keep our core product free and then offer something beyond this for users who are interested. So rather than just taking this hardline approach of you've reached 5 page views, now we're going to cut you off, it's offering everything we currently offer, but then doing what Arvid recommended is really augmenting that value proposition. What's something that we could offer in addition to that? So we're working with some people from the Membership Puzzle right now, and we're going to get some help on the qualitative research front in the form of interviews and user testing to see what these types of users might want and see if this type of model makes more sense for us. A couple sites that do this, Slate Plus is an example, and also Talking Points Memo has a membership. And you can go to membershippuzzle.org and see all of the, in their database, they've got lots of examples. So that's what's in the immediate future for us.
I apologize. I'm having trouble seeing the questions here, but Mac McMillan has a question. You said the first months are successful. They are tracking ahead of your Mather predictions. Well, we didn't use Mather to format our initial predictions. We knew that we planned on having Listener on the site once we did have the paywall or the meter up live. But we modeled the projections based on some industry metrics on conversion rate against our traffic. So we used a little algebraic logic to determine how many meter stops we could expect to see from our level of traffic, what conversion rate would be reasonable between some highs and lows, that some data that was provided to us from the Lenfest Institute and Matt Skavinsky. So, it was a little bit of art, but mostly science on how we came to those numbers. And we, again, felt pretty good about how that started. So. Tom Bell has another question. Do we compare something like Google Surveys revenue to the paywall with Meter? Arvid, maybe you can talk a little bit about the similarities between Listener and GA, or some of the other products that websites might be using to track their revenue and audience.
Sure. Yeah. So you can measure kind of that Google survey revenue out of Google if you're using it. Unfortunately, Google has some unique kind of, not privacy laws, but unique kind of walls they built to kind of keep that data pretty private. So unfortunately, that's the one of the few things that Listener does not integrate with, is the surveys. But like I said, we are pulling data from nearly every ad server and programmatic exchange. But to get to the question as well, you can certainly count the Google survey revenue as part of the calculation. So if that's something that you feel on your side is a significant driver of revenue, we can kind of augment what we see in Listener with that survey data, or with that survey revenue as well. So all revenues on the table when it comes to measuring the trade-off.
Yeah, all the revenue is definitely good. Mark Kwan has a question for me. Are you serving up a print subscription offer along with the digital? And if we're counting the print starts in our number, yes, we do have. We've tested different offers from period to period. Right now, we have an offer. If you come to us from out of market, that you're identifiable, you're outside of our core market, we offer you just the digital only. But if we can identify the device you're coming from within our market, then you're offered a digital subscription or a print, either Sunday or 7-day with digital access. So there's 3 offers that you see, and if you come to us through those channels, we do consider you a digitally motivated subscriber, because you bought the subscription through because you were presented with a modal and a buying decision that was commensurate with your digital viewing of our content. So yes, about 20% of our subscriptions that come through the Meter do have a print component. The majority of those are Sunday, but surprisingly enough, we do see some 7-day starts that include full digital access as part of our order mix that comes from Philly.com. Timothy Miller has a question. I'm sorry, let me do one more question here. Are inserts in the paper part of the digital product? Only if you select a print component with your subscription. If you select a digital only, then you don't receive any print products delivered, except for those that come with either the 7 or Sunday only subscription that you purchase. So how are we doing on time? Do we have a few more minutes, Bob, or should we begin to wrap?
How about that question from John Byrne? That might be a good one for Arvid to answer.
I'm not seeing that. Would you go ahead and take that one?
So John is asking if we're able to track users that drop out of the purchase funnel, and I think maybe you can expand on what kind of strategy we might be able to help capture that.
Sure. Yeah. So listener, as was mentioned, it's on in this case, in Jim's case, it's on the MG2 paywall. So it's on the kind of the event capture and also the on the users. So what we're able to tell is not just people who hit the paywall and converted or logged in. We can tell who hit the paywall and bounced, or if they got through a few stages in that conversion funnel. Typically, it's the pop-up or the modal happens first. Then the users presented with several offers to choose from. If they click one of those, we're capturing that information. If they click kind of into the checkout pages where they're entering in their billing information, email, account setup, and all that. So we're capturing data as people kind of step through those stages of the funnel. So one of the point, I guess the question is if someone, let's say, enters in their email address or they enter in some information as part of that process, then they don't actually complete the order. We can enable what we call kind of offline email cart abandonment retargeting, or just cart abandonment retargeting. So we actually collect those email addresses, append any kind of the prior engagement data that we have for that user, and send that on a daily basis into G2, marketing G2 for email follow-ups. This is very similar to what I think many retailers do. When you fill out your shopping basket, or you fill up your shopping basket, you go to the order page, you don't submit the order, they'll probably email you from Amazon or from any retail site. Then similarly, even if you don't enter your email address, we can still tell from a user perspective who hit the paywall and bounced. So that can enable retargeting on the site using like an ad server, the paywall itself, or even using kind of network retargeting, like using a tool like Simplify. So the segments are pretty easy to create in terms of different behaviors and how they abandon the cart.
Hey, Arvid, one more question from Debbie Tolman, sorry. Do you have a use case for combining Listener and Connects to drive retention of paying subs, basically a subscriber meter experience to support deeper engagement and transactional messaging?
Really good question. We this is actually, I think, on Jim our list. I know we have on the next step. So we don't have a use case or a case study we can share the results yet, but it's very much a part of what we're working on. So the idea would be to say, using the MG2 paywall, or really any paywall for that instance, but using the paywall as a kind of a marketing tool rather than a metering engine, and saying if let's say listener recognizes a subscriber coming on the site who's logged in or who has logged in, and we know from our kind of offline data that they're actually about to lapse in payment, or they're approaching an expire date, or worst case, their credit card got declined and they haven't paid it yet. So you can actually trigger an experience with the paywall to message them a reminder on the site directly with that paywall. So it's almost like, and it's really exciting because most of the paywall use cases have been acquisitions, conversions, all that kind of stuff. This is a really cool one where we're actually applying paywall and all this intelligence to improve retention and improve the renewal rates. So great tactic, and I think we'll have a case study hopefully this before the summer's out.
Yeah, that was a great question, Debbie, and that, as Arvid mentioned, we credit card declines is one avenue that we're pursuing and serving messaging through the paywall, and also if we find reader consumption habits changing over time. If we've got a subscriber that's been with us for a little while and we start to see their article views or page views drop off, we want to test messaging to them to re-engage them and deepen their engagement, especially prior to renewal. So absolutely, we intend to use the meter and the listener integration on both acquisition as well as retention fronts.
Guys, we're at the top of the hour. We want to be conscious of everyone's time. There's still a few questions out there. Arvid will get to those questions. The team here will, and make sure we get you some answers. As I mentioned, thank you to Todd, Arvid, and Jim for a great session. I always like it when the sessions run long. It means there's a lot of interest. And also thanks to the attendees for all the wonderful questions, and there's some that we didn't get to that we will. And as a reminder, anybody who registered will get an email with the deck and the recording from this session. So again, thanks for attending, and please feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any questions that come up after or as you review this with your team. and have a great rest of the day.